sorry now that I'm a little late. I apologize that you had to wait. It totally slipped my mind. I lost all my sense of time. So buy me that drink and just let me think, and I'll tell you the reasons why. My alibi.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Alibi the podcast, an initiative started by Gagasan Mahasiswa Undang-Undang Sabah. I'm your host, Geoffrey. Joining me today are Brenda, Samuel, Dylan, and a very, very special guest, Professor James Chin. Professor Chin is a professor of Asian Studies and the inaugural director of the Asia Institute at the University of Tasmania. He is also a senior fellow at the Geoffrey Sim Institute, Malaysia, council member at the Australian Institute of International Affairs, and adjunct professor at Monash University. Prior to an academic career, he worked as a journalist in Malaysia and Singapore. Professor Chin is a leading commentator on Malaysian politics and has published extensively on Malaysia and the surrounding region. Professor Chin has appeared on CNN, BBC World TV, CNBC, Bloomberg TV, and Channel News Asia to talk about the developments in the region. His comments are often reported in The Economist, The New York Times, Financial Times, South China Morning Post, Wall Street Journal, and other leading publications. So on this episode today, we are going to be talking about the elections in Malaysia. But before that, let's have a little ice-breaking session, a little self-introduction. I'll go first. I'm the host, Geoffrey, and I am currently a second-year law student in Help University Damansara. Brenda?
Hi everyone, I'm Brenda and I'm currently a third-year law student in Taylor's University.
Sam?
Oh, hi everyone. My name is Samuel. I'm a final year law student at Brickfields Asia College.
Hello, I'm Dylan, and I am a bar school LLM student at Northumbria University.
All right. And Professor Chin?
Oh, hi. My name is James Chin. Originally, I'm from Sarawak. I'm currently a professor of Asian Studies at the University of Tasmania.
All right. So a little ice-breaking question. So the ice-breaking question of the day is, what inspires you to get up in the morning? So Professor James Chin, would you like to tell us about what inspires you to get up in the morning?
Yeah, I have to get up in the morning because I've got to take my children to school.
For me, what inspires me to get up in the morning is the first sip of that morning kopi o, that black coffee. What about you, Brenda?
I think this is quite a tough question for me to answer because usually now I wake up in the afternoons and I'm not really a morning person. But then if I do get up in the morning, that's very rare. That means that I really look forward to something that I'm going to do the next day. So yeah.
What about you, Sam?
Getting up to record this podcast.
And you, Dylan?
I could give you a very cliche answer and say it's because I wanna better my career and everything. But I suppose breakfast is the best thing that gets me up in the morning, and then everything else comes after that.
All right. I think that's all for the ice-breaking session. Now going into the bulk of the question of the topic today, that is elections in Malaysia. So I think the first question we would like to ask you, Professor Chin, is what are your opinions on the current general Malaysian political scene?
Thank you very much for that question. That's a very good question to start this conversation. So basically, there's two ways of looking at Malaysian politics now. One is that you can argue that after the short government of Pakatan Harapan, As you know, Pakatan Harapan replaced the Barisan Nasional, which was in power for almost 60 years. We tried a new model. That model didn't really work because in 2020, Pakatan Harapan fell apart and it was replaced by Perikatan Nasional. So basically, the way to understand that is that Perikatan Nasional was very much a Malay-centric government. So you sort of move from a multiracial Pakistan government back to a Malay-centric government. As you know, that government did not last as well. So in August this year, that government fell apart. So now we are in a funny situation where it is in between a UMNO plus government or a UMNO stroke Perikatan National government. So that's one way of looking at it, and that is basically that we're moving back towards a very Malay-centric type of government. The second way of looking at it is that since 2018, Malaysian politics is really all about instability. The coalition that we're seeing doesn't work very well together. So everybody is trying to look for a new model so that they can have some sort of political instability. Now, if you were to ask me what is happening right now, I would argue that what is happening right now is that this government is a very unstable government. Having said that, they know that they are unstable. They have a very small majority. So that's the reason why they signed a MOU with the opposition. And basically, the MOU is to keep the current government in power, provide a level of political stability, while the government, both the government and the opposition, prepare for GE15. So it's all very much that for the last couple of years, everyone is preparing for GE15 because they have to go back to the rakyat to see which side the rakyat will support this time. As you know, the government of 2020 and the government of 2021 were not elected by the people. They are what Malaysians call essentially a change of government brought about by changing the majority and changing the people who put together that majority.
Just to add on to that question, Professor, so do you think it was a wise choice for the opposition to sign that MOU with the current government?
At the time the MOU was signed, I think there were lots of hope that the government will implement, I'm talking about the federal government, will implement some of the promises that were made. I think for the opposition, they saw it as a very long shot in terms of forcing the government to undertake real fundamental reforms in the political system. Example of fundamental reforms is, for example, they wanted a term limit on the prime minister. They wanted to implement changes to the constitution. For people of Sabah and Sarawak, the Malaysia agreement is a very, very important issue. So all this was put into the MOU. So, for example, I can tell the opposition is not very happy with some of the budget proposals, even though that, you know, part of the reasons why they signed the MOU was that they wanted a fairer budget. So I think the MOU has not worked very well. And basically, I think people don't talk about it anymore. People are now talking about the Melaka state election and the upcoming Sarawak election. And people are sort of moving back or stepping back from the MOU. And everybody understands that the only game in town now is really GE15. Which supposedly is supposed to be held in 2023, but I would argue that it will actually be held next year.
All right. Speaking of the Melaka elections, Professor Chen, what are your thoughts on carrying out an election during the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic?
I think if you were to ask the ordinary Malaysians, I'm not talking about the political class, if you were to ask the ordinary Malaysians, I think most of them would say that it's a very bad idea. It's a very bad idea because we know from the Sabah election that was held last year, it turned out to be a super spreader event. This time it's going to be worse because we know that a very unusual strain called the Delta strain is in Malaysia now, and that one is highly infectious. What is unusual about this strain is that you no longer have to be in the same room with the person with the COVID virus. You can just walk past or go in the room where that person was a few minutes ago and you still catch it. So I think Melaka will turn out to be a super spreader. Sarawak election will almost 100% will be a super spreader because many of those campaign people in Melaka after the Melaka election will fly to Sarawak for the Sarawak election. So I think for the ordinary people, I think they think that it's a really bad idea. In some ways, it also shows that the political class in Malaysia doesn't really care about what the ordinary people thinks. They only worry about their own positions and political power. Because it's obvious that if you have a super spreader event, the people who will pay the price will be people with underlying medical issues and the older part of the Malaysian population. So I'm talking about the number of deaths will probably shoot up. The number of people entering ICU will probably shoot up.
Professor Chin, basing on what you just said, okay, based on last year's Sabah elections, do you think there's anything that we can learn probably for Melaka elections and Sarawak elections to kind of contain, I mean, it will be a super spreader, but to kind of contain and learn from what has happened before? Do you think there's anything we can learn from last year's election in Sabah?
Yeah, the lesson is don't hold election during pandemic.
Okay, so moving on to the next question though. How should we educate and bring awareness to today's younger generation about the current political climate in Malaysia?
I think it's extremely important that the younger generation take an active role in trying to understand the Malaysian political systems. So basically, there's two ways of doing it. One is what I might call the official way. This is the stuff you study in the Malaysian high school, and also the stuff that is put up by the government through the compulsory courses at university. So that one teaches you more or less the institutional side of the system, how many houses of parliament, how many seats, how laws get passed, the major government departments, the role of the royalty, all that sort of thing. The other side is harder to learn. The other side is actually to learn the real politics, what is happening in the real political world. And that is about learning current affairs, what is happening around you, what are the MPs doing in parliament, who are your representatives. So I think the way to get the young people interested is basically teach them the formal structure of the Malaysian political institutions, and at the same time teach them about what is happening in the current affairs. I think the most important thing that young people need to understand is that politics affect their lives. A lot of people, especially young people, tend to ignore politics because they think, oh, this doesn't affect me, when in fact politics really affect your lives. And I'll just give you a very, very simple example. Now, if you were to ask young people what is the number one priority, most of them, of course, they wouldn't use exactly the same language I'm using, but most of them will talk about they want a better Malaysia and more opportunities when they finish their studies. In other words, they want their lives to be better than the lives of their parents. Now, in order to do that, it means that we need fundamental reforms of the system, especially in the economy, right? So in order to do that, right, that will have to be driven by the political process. You see, if you don't get the politics right, you can't get the economics right. So for example, right, if you can't get the politics right, people will not invest in this country. If you don't get the right government, you don't get the right policies, why should foreign investors come to this country? And even at a very, very fundamental level, you can't run away from politics. For example, one of the unusual things about the Malaysian economy is that we don't really have a what do you call it, a private economy here. So if you go and look at Bursa Malaysia, and a lot of people don't realize this, if you look at the 10 largest capital caps in Bursa Malaysia, right, 9 of them are GLCs, government-linked companies. So therefore, right, the Malaysian economy is basically an economy run by the government. So this comes back to my earlier point. If you don't get the right government, you don't get the right economy, then really you don't have a future. So I think it's very important that young people understand that, politics is really an important thing in their lives, and that it is to everybody's interest that we get the right politics. For the people of Sabah, Sarawak, this is even easier to explain. As you know, the people of Sabah and Sarawak are very worried about this thing called recognition of Malaysia Agreement, and recognition that Sabah and Sarawak helped to form the federation, and therefore Sabah and Sarawak must have special status in the Malaysian political system. In order to do that, this will have to be driven by politics, isn't it? It's really a political process that allows you to change the constitution. So these are examples of where the young people must understand that they may not like politics. They may hear a lot of bad things about what politicians do, all the corruption, maladministration, what have you. But at the end of the day, politics really affect their lives, and it's really for their own interest that they should be interested in politics.
Professor, just a little bit follow up on that use, right? We know for a fact there is, I'm sure everyone knows this organization called Undi 18, which they're really passionate about implementing, lowering the voter age youth from 21 to 18. So serious about it that I believe youth in Sarawak filed a judicial review to the Kuching High Court. So I would like to ask, recently, even PM Sabri said that they will comply with the Kuching High Court to implement, I think, automatic voter registration. However, there is some sort of a general notion or a general view that the parties in the government are afraid of youth voting. And there's even rumors going around that the Sarawak elections are going to be held this year so that the youth can't really vote. How would the implementation of Undi 18 affect the next general election?
Well, the answer is fairly obvious. If you're going to bring a lot of young people, 18, 19, and 20-year-olds, if you're going to bring more than 1 million new voters into the political system, this will affect, a lot of results. In some of the seats, there will be an increase of more than 15% of the voters because of these young voters. So obviously, they can affect the outcome. I think in general, you are right in the sense that the incumbent, the government, is afraid of young voters because the underlying assumption is that young voters, people like yourself, are anti-establishment, tend to support the opposition. But I would argue that this may not be true. The reason is because we don't have any data. So basically, when people talk about young people against the government for the opposition, right, you are really talking about no data. You're just making a guess. Because young people have not voted before, so you can't really say which side they'll vote because, there's no basis, no empirical evidence to say either way. What you can say is that it is much harder for the existing political party to reach out to the younger voters because all the methods they use to reach out to the existing voters doesn't work with young people anymore, right? So, for example, people of your generation, I'm very old already, but I also know that people of your generation, right, don't bother watching the news at 8 o'clock at night. You get most of your news from your mobile phones, things like that. In fact, you get all your political information from your mobile phones. That is the main source of your information. And secondly, having spoken to young people, I would also argue that the majority of you guys, right, don't really like to read long articles about politics. You want everything maybe maximum, 1 or 2 scrolls on your mobile phone. So, the sort of things that you are interested in, the way to explain the political positions to you, I think all that will change. So the traditional methods of using mainstream media, all that sort of thing, those things goes out the window. So reaching young people is a very, very different type of politics, different form of interaction. And I think this is where the political parties have to fundamentally change the way they communicate, how they want the younger voters to interact with them. And I suspect the majority of the more established parties, they're not ready or they haven't reached that point yet. So that's the reason why organizations like Undi 18 exist, because they're set up by young people to reach out to other young people. You can't get, the mainstream parties to reach out to the young people. As I said earlier, they haven't gone through this yet. So it'll take them some time to catch up. So probably after 1 or 2 general elections, then they'll learn how to reach out to the 18, 19, and 20-year-olds. Now, having said that, of course, we know that there are lots of newly set up NGOs and CSOs who has been set up in the last 2 years to reach out to the younger people. So a lot of them have actually what I might call reach out to the young people using a thing called infographics, right? They try to explain difficult things like by publishing that thing. So I can guarantee if you go back 5-10 years ago, right, none of the political parties are doing that sort of thing. But now you see even the mainstream political parties are doing that. Try to simplify the information, put it in infographics format so that they can reach young people. And also, the latest thing in Malaysia now is that increasingly political parties and politicians are going to TikTok. If I would ask those politicians TikTok, if I've asked them 2 years ago, right, none of them would understand that thing. What is that? But now everybody understands what is TikTok. So that's an example of how the political system had to change, because they've got to reach out to a whole new layer of, for lack of a better word, they've got to work out how they're going to engage a new layer of stakeholders, 18, 19, and 20 years old. So I think generally two main impact for young people in the electoral system. One is that they will fundamentally change election results, because as I mentioned, some seats there will be a big number of new voters, and secondly, the political parties themselves will change, about how they interact with young people and learn new tricks as well.
So, Professor Chin, to follow up with your answer, right? How will you personally encourage more young people to be active in politics, considering that society views 18-year-olds as immature, right? Or not mature enough to vote for their choice of government. And then society usually views young people as being too idealistic, like they will usually tell young people, politics is very messy, don't go into it, don't get involved in it. But then, how will you personally encourage more youths to be aware of the current political situation and to get themselves involved?
Well, the answer is very simple. You have to tell the young people that if you're not interested in politics, you are harming your own future. So if you want a better Malaysia, you want a better job, if you want a higher standard of living, all these are driven by the political process. So it is to your own benefit that you want to get involved in the political process. For the young people of Sabah and Sarawak, it is my understanding that Malaysia Agreement 63 is a big issue. If you want to resolve this issue politically, then it is the political process. So either way, if you want to deal with anything in life, a lot of things in Malaysia are political in nature. So that's how you get the young people to be interested. To be fair, I think this thing about your young people not understanding, not interested, I would say that that is probably true until today. Now that you've given them the vote, I think they have a larger stake in the system. They understand that they can actually help to elect the next government. So I think in terms of getting involved, I'm sure a lot of them will be much more involved from now
on. Following from that, Professor Chin, do you have any general advice for youth? I mean, we talked about youth voting as voters, but youth going into the political field, as you can see, such as, Syed Saddiq, for example, before. Do you think that there's obviously a setback where, following what Brenda said, they are ridiculed in Parliament, as we have seen? Do you think that's something that hinders youth from joining politics now, at the moment now?
No. I think one of the main reasons why youth have not joined politics is because previously the major political parties did not engage them, because you are not voters, right? So they won't engage. So now that young people are now on the voting roll, as I said, the major political parties will have to engage the young people as the new stakeholders. So with more engagement, it means that they will be drawing a bigger group of young people into the political process. As to your second question, people like Muda, Syed Saddiq, all that sort of thing, I think what we will see in the coming years is that increasingly young people will probably engage with new political parties rather than the existing political parties. Now, the reason why I say that is because if the older political parties can't really interact with the younger generations. My understanding is that the younger generations are not willing to wait. So they'll probably pivot to new political vehicles, either Muda or some other political vehicles that's coming out. So I think we will see a much more diverse political party system in Malaysia, with more parties coming up rather than less parties.
Speaking of the youth, right? What do you think about the more older generation or the people in interior areas who are not as tech savvy and that they do not have access to social media and technology, and they are more prone to believing fake news that they just receive, without actually assessing whether they are true, whether they are quite true or not? How do you think this can be resolved when it comes to elections? How do you think the fact that there's a gap in tech, how should it be resolved during elections?
The short answer is that a lot of these older people, they don't rely on technology. The sort of technology they're using are very simple stuff, things like WhatsApp, the short videos in WhatsApp that's widely distributed in the last Sabah election. So I don't think that technology plays such an important role. So, for example, in rural Sabah, as you know, I visit Sabah quite often. In rural Sabah, many of the seats and the way elections are conducted is all based on personality and personal connections. Which group you belong to? Are you Kadazan? Are you Dusun or whatever? Are you Muslim? Are you not Muslim? Which area you come from? Your relatives, your immediate family. Those are the things that sort of help you to understand politics and help you to choose who to support, rather than information overload you have with young people in the urban areas. So I think for that generation, the older people, I don't think much will change, because the political parties are very well suited to interact with that group. I think what will change is that the young people, now that they're given the vote, I suspect they'll be more active in trying to bring change to the rural areas, as in they will start probably be more active in the rural areas, because previously some of them, for example, prior to this year, some of them will probably just act as support workers for some of these major political parties in rural area. But going forward, they don't have to do that anymore, because they themselves can be the candidates. They can represent different parties, right? You don't have to work for the existing political parties anymore. So this is the reason why I talk about a much more diverse field of politicians coming in and a much more diverse field of political parties.
All right, Professor Chen, moving on to the Melaka elections. What are your just general thoughts on the upcoming Melaka elections? Do you think it's a good idea, bad idea? How do you think it came about?
Oh, okay. So I've already said it many times. I think holding election during a pandemic is always a bad idea, because it tends to be a super spreader event. In terms of this election, I think it's quite clear. Two things are very clear. The first one is that it's much harder to predict the outcome of these elections. The reason is because the election commission no longer allows things like big charamas. They don't allow house-to-house campaigning. So it's much more difficult for people such as myself to try to gauge which way the wind is blowing or what are the feelings on the ground. So it's you sort of doing your campaign in the dark, because you can't get immediate feedback from the ground. I think the second important point about the Melaka elections is that for the major Malay parties, I think they're looking at the results or the upcoming results of the Melaka election as a signal from the Malay ground about which party they will support with GE15, the upcoming big general elections. So they're sort of using Melaka as a baseline to see which way the Malays will swing, and also what sort of issues that will attract the Malay voters. Because we are sort of going into a general election with some sort of restriction. So this is very much a training election for them, for the major Malay parties, and also the other non-Malay parties like DAP, all these things. So this is really part of their training process before the big GE15 that will probably be held next year.
Professor, I would like to ask you a little bit on particular party, Parti Muda, which you mentioned just now. I actually been prior to this podcast, been quite eager to ask you about Parti Muda. So I think earlier there were talks of Muda wanting to campaign in the seats. However, they pull out due to some disagreements with Pakatan Harapan itself. What are your thoughts on Muda not campaigning in this Melaka election? Will it harm them in any way by not campaigning for this Melaka election?
Okay, in terms of their participation in the Melaka, it's also a well-known fact that the reason why they pull out is because they disagree with Pakatan Harapan taking in the defectors. So they're very unhappy that the Pakatan Harapan have decided to field a couple of candidates from the previous Melaka state government. Will it harm them? The answer is no, it will not harm them. But I would have thought that if I was in Muda, I would not have stood up in the election. I would still come to a deal with Pakatan Harapan, stand under the party, because as you know, Muda is not registered. And the reason why I say that it's important for Muda to take part is because this is a real life example of what elections will look like after the COVID. So Muda has not been tested. Having said that, of course, Muda is extremely popular because it is the only youth party that has sort of reached out to every segment of the youth in Malaysian society. So for Muda, the next step is really to be registered. Although it is widely understood that they have a fallback position. They have an agreement with Parti Warisan Sabah where if they do not get registered in time, they will stand under Parti Warisan's logo. But my expectation is that Muda will actually get registered. Once the case reaches the courts, the Registrar of Society will back down, especially the Home Minister will back down and register Muda. So I fully expect Muda to take part in GE15, but they will go into GE15 without a bit of training through the Melaka state election.
So, Professor Chin, do you think that overall in the Melaka elections, do you think that the prohibition of political parties campaigning physically is a fair one, for the reason being to make it safer for all contesting parties and the voters since it's the time of the pandemic?
No, it's not going to make much of a difference. So even though you don't allow people to campaign in big rallies or big gatherings, knowing Malaysian politicians, they'll find a way around this. They tend to get very creative. So I'm sure they'll still find a way to reach out to the voters physically. I think what will happen is that it will just slow the spread of the virus, but it's not going to stop the virus from spreading. People do not realize that the Delta Plus strain of COVID that's in Malaysia, right? It's a very unusual strain. This strain spreads very, very easily. So, for example, you don't have to be in front of that person to catch Delta Plus. That person can just walk past you, and you breathe in, and that's it. You get COVID-19.
I have one more question. With the prevalent rise in elected representatives jumping from one party to another, right? Do you think that the anti-hopping law should be implemented? What are your thoughts on it? Do you think it is right to impose restrictions on them from jumping ship to join another party by their own free will? Or do you agree with the view that their right to freely join other associations should be protected by the federal constitution?
So this case has actually been adjudicated some time ago, and the High Court of Malaysia found that you really cannot stop an existing YB from moving to another political party. I think it is true that there is an element of betrayal of trust especially if you're not an independent candidate, like you stand under a party, and midway through the term of parliament, you decided to jump to another party. But having said that, I think a much more, rather than stopping people from jumping, I think a much better law, in my opinion, if you were to codify it into law, a much better law would be the candidate who's elected under a party will have to resign if they want to jump to another party. In other words, you allow the political party that won the election to select a replacement. Because at the end of the day, that person got elected because of that party label. So if that person is not happy in that party, so for whatever reason that person wants to jump to another party or leave the party, I think you should not stop the person. It is his individual right, but he has to return the seat to the party that won the election. I would have thought that would be a much better solution, because the prevailing thinking among the political class in Malaysia is that if this person resigns or jumps to another party, we will hold a by-election, which I don't think is a good idea.
Professor, so I would actually like to ask your thoughts about this. So we know that Pakatan Harapan, particularly PKR and Amanah, has decided to take back two candidates. It's YB Idris Harun and YB Noor Ahmad Hassan as their candidates. And to this, many Malaysians were even surprised and somewhat even disappointed. Could you tell us what's the reasoning behind this? Because, Pakatan Harapan were always claiming to be, they want anti-hopping laws, they don't want MPs to jump ship from one to another, yet they decide to take back two candidates that were formerly part of the Perhentikan national government. Do you think this is all about survival of the fittest, like wanting to win badly in the Melaka election?
I think you've already answered your own question. So this is all about winning the Melaka state election. So obviously that Anwar Ibrahim and Pakatan Harapan believes that these two candidates from the previous government standing under PKR Amanah now are what we call winnable candidates. They're going to take their seats, and this will help Pakatan win the next Melaka state government.
Okay, thank you, Professor Chin. Now I'll just move on to the Sarawak election questions. With the Sarawak election bound to happen, right? What's your opinion on Malaysia having two state elections? Are we going to see a mirror reflection of Melaka in the Sarawak election?
No. Elections in Sabah and Sarawak are very different from elections in the rest of Malaysia. So the political dynamics in Sarawak, for example, is very different from, say, politics in Sabah or politics in Malaya. Same thing with the political dynamics in Sabah. It's sort of unique to Sabah itself. So the elections in Sarawak will be very different from Melaka, and most of the issues and most of the most of the political drivers dealing with the upcoming Sarawak elections will be domestic in nature. In other words, those issues are very specific to Sarawak. National issues have never really mattered much in any Sarawak state elections.
All right, Professor Chin, just to follow up on that, what kind of significance does the Sarawak election bring towards Malaysia as a whole?
Very good question. The short answer is that there is no impact. Because the federal government, whether it falls or it survives, depends on the MPs. With the Sarawak state election, we are electing people to the state assembly. So it has no direct impact. The upcoming Sarawak state election is really about GPS, the ruling coalition, versus the current group of opposition in Sarawak. So it is very much an election about GPS and the GPS Chief Minister Abang Jo, and whether they can get a big majority like they did in 2016. So it has no direct implications at the federal level. And in some ways, it's also an election about the GPS philosophy of Sarawak first. As you know, GPS was formed after 2018. It used to be called the Sarawak Barisan Nasional. This is their first state election. It's also the first election for Abang Jo to get his own mandate. So it's very much, a test of this GPS political philosophy of Sarawak first, or what we call state nationalism, to see how it works with the Sarawak electorate.
All right. Just one last question about the Sarawak elections. Professor Chin, what are your general opinions of it at this current time? With it being conducted during this pandemic, right? What are the challenges of parties during this the Sarawak election?
Oh, okay. So as I mentioned already, I expect Sarawak election, like the Melaka election, will be a super spreader event. It will just simply help COVID to spread wider. I think the Sarawak state government is making a mistake by holding the election earlier, because as you know, the emergency was supposed to be lifted at the end of January or Chinese New Year, where it will be lifted. I would have thought that's just an additional 2 more months, December and January, so there's really no rush for them to hold the state election. So it is widely understood that GPS is rushing to hold the state election because they're afraid of young voters. They want to avoid the young voters. So that's why they're holding the state election. In terms of the political parties, what is interesting is that GPS appears to be holding all the cards. The reason is because the opposition is hopelessly divided between a local-based party like PSB, PBK, and the Sarawak Pakatan Harapan, which is also divided. So on the other side of the equation is, of course, GPS, highly united, highly motivated, because in the last state election, they won 72 out of 82 seats. And of course, GPS can also claim to be the real champions of Malaysia agreement, because they managed to table the bill on changing the constitution just recently.
Right. One more question, general question. With the elections being held during the pandemics, Professor Chin, what do you think is the possibility of elections being held online?
No, it is not possible. The reason is that although the technology exists for online voting, it's not going to work in Malaysia for a simple reason that there are many parts of Malaysia where the internet speed is really terrible. And secondly, a large chunk of the Malaysian population, especially interiors, really have no access to computers, or they're not used to computers. So it's really not possible to have an online election. It sounds good on paper, but in terms of implementing it in a country like Malaysia, is almost impossible.
All right. Okay, thank you. That is all from the Sarawak election questions. We have one last final segment. It's a fun segment we always have with our guests, where we ask questions, personal questions. This final question, we just want to know, what is your favorite place to go for vacations in Malaysia?
Interesting. Okay, for Sabah, I usually hang around Penampang. When I'm in Malaya, my favorite place is Ipoh. Ipoh is a sort of a very nice town. They got very nice hawker food. And in Sarawak, my favorite place is Kuching, my hometown.
Mm-hmm.
So it depends on where I am at that particular moment, rather than one specific spot. Yep.
I'm surprised, the professor, you said Penampang. Is there a reason why Penampang?
I don't know. I always found that place an interesting place. Those people who don't know Sabah think that Penampang is very rural. Penampang is not, it's just a few, about less than 1 hour's drive from KK. So it's sort of semi-rural, if you want to call it. But I always found the people of Penampang interesting. You have it's sort of in between a rural and urban setting.
Yeah.
So, Professor, your hometown is from Kuching. You are from Kuching, is it?
Yes. I grew up in Kuching. Yes.
My father's hometown is also from Kuching. He's we're from Third Mile. Yeah.
Third Mile. Yes.
Third Mile.
Yeah.
Okay. What about you, Brenda? What is your favorite place to go for vacation in Malaysia?
Personally, my favorite place to go for vacation will be Kundasang because I personally like the weather there. It's cold, it's chilly, and I like cold places ever since I was young. Like I went to the national park there before when I was around 3 or 4 years old. So I have a soft spot for really cold and chilly places. So yes, it will always be Kundasang.
What about you, Sam?
Mine would be actually Mount Kinabalu, because though I'm a Sabahan, I have not gone for a climb yet. So yeah, I'd like to go there one day.
Dylan?
Okay. I don't know. I guess cliche, but like I like to go KL. It's nice to. I'm a city kind of person, so I like to see, tall skyscrapers and go to shopping malls. So I would say KL lah. Yeah. But if you say, like another holiday, probably Melaka or Penang, just for different food and nice pictures. Yeah.
I think okay. My opinion, my favorite place is I would say Penang because I really like the people there.
Mm-hmm.
It's very my hometown is in Kuching, Sarawak, and well I don't know why, but Penang sort of is like even though I have no relatives there, it feels like home.
Okay.
And I really like the art. It's very artistic, and I feel like the community there is just very vibrant. Yeah.
Yeah, Penang is a gem.
It's a hidden gem. Well, okay. Thank you very much, Professor Chin. Well, that's all the time we have, folks. Thank you for listening to Alibi the podcast. We hope you enjoyed this episode and we look forward to talking about more relatable and relevant Sabahan law student topics. I'm your host, Geoffrey. Special thanks to our guest, Professor James Shin, on this episode. If you haven't checked out our previous episode, please do subscribe to us to stay updated on all our latest content, and we will see you in the next episode. Thank you.
Sorry now that I'm a little late. I apologize that you had to wait. It totally slipped my mind. I lost all my sense of time. So buy me that drink and just let me think, and I'll tell you the reasons why.